Well, Mrs. Savick, are you going to stay with the sinking ship?
Permission to speak candidly, sir.
Granted.
I don't believe this was a fair test of my command abilities.
And why not?
Because there was no way to win.
A no-win situation is a possibility every commander may face. Has that never occurred to you?
No, sir. It has not.
How we deal with death is at least as important as how we deal with life, wouldn't you say?
As I indicated, Admiral, that thought had not occurred to me.
Well, now you have something new to think about. Carry on.
Hello, it's Parm King, the Dungeon Master of Legends of Barovia, a Curse of Strahd campaign. And today's Dungeon Master's tip is Kobayashi Maru scenario. Now, those of you that are not familiar with Star Trek lore are probably not familiar with the Kobayashi Maru scenario. In Star Trek, the young cadets go to Starfleet Academy. It's like a West Point or an Annapolis Naval Academy, which they're trained to become officers to serve in Starfleet. One of the exercises in the academy is the Kobayashi Maru scenario. It's a scenario where the young cadets face a no-win scenario. No matter what decision they make, they can't win. It's the lesser of two evils. It's the less bad choice, and even the less bad choice is the worst choice. The entire exercise is done in order to evaluate the cadets' ability to problem solve, command and leadership, how they deal with stressful situations, and it's a great idea to incorporate into Dungeons and Dragons. So today I'm going to tell you why, how, and what not to do with some examples. The reason why is, well, if we look at every great story, from Shakespeare to The Witcher to Game of Thrones, there's these moments, these elements where players or characters in these stories have to make a decision or make a bad decision. It has tragic consequences, and it makes those stories memorable. When we introduce these elements into the game, years from now, our players will look back and remember these key decisions that they had to make. It also introduces creative problem solving and thinking by your players. It really heightens the experience, adds a level of stress and uncertainty, and actually excitement to the game. What are some scenarios that you can add your own Kobayashi Maru? Let me give you some examples. The first one I call is the morality example, or the Shakespearean tragic example. You have two NPCs. Both of them are related perhaps to your characters. Your characters care immensely about both of them. And they're both poisoned and about to die. You have an antidote just enough to save one, and the other one's going to die. What do your players do? This injects a tremendous amount of stress and moral conflict with your players. Which one are they going to save? Which one is going to die? Perhaps it's the young one they save because they have their life ahead of them. Perhaps it's one that's going to help benefit the party. It doesn't matter. What you're doing is introducing this element, so your players have to make a critical decision. They're going to have to make a moral sacrifice. Another one is I call the carrot and the stick Kobayashi Maru scenario. For instance, perhaps behind a magic door or magic wall, there's some treasure or some item the players desperately want. But in order to solve the riddle or get through this door, the player is going to have to interact and attune to something. Perhaps the door has a magical riddle. And every time they fail the riddle, they take some serious amounts of damage. Enough so that if they fail to save it 3 times, they die. Is it worth their life to open up this magic door or gateway to get to that item on the other side? The other players can stand back and watch the player that volunteers to do this, but perhaps the player is attuned, only one player at the time can solve it. This creates another moral dilemma. Do the other players watch one player perhaps sacrifice themselves in effort to open up this door to get to the item, and if they don't fully solve it but the other players do, they sacrifice one of their own to get it? That is another interesting conflict to introduce. Another one is a kind of the fork in the road decision. This introduces a timing element. Perhaps on the main quest, the characters have to get to a particular town by a certain time. If they don't get there by a certain time, something is going to happen. That's a timing element that you've introduced. However, on the way, in a little village which the characters go to and perhaps are helped and become attached to some of the players in this village, the village is attacked by a werewolf. And the werewolf has kidnapped or started attacking the villagers. The players can decide to hunt down the werewolf, track it and kill it, or save one of the NPCs that's been captured. But in doing so, they risk not getting to the town or their main quest in time, which is vitally important. Do they let the players of the village die, or this kidnapped person perhaps die at the hands of the werewolf? Or do the players allow the town and the village to succumb to death and destruction, or a player NPC perhaps die? This is a decision, the fork in the road, if you will, Kobayashi Maru type scenario. The last one I'll introduce is, or idea that I'll bring forth, is the idea of a giant combat scenario. You have a bunch of perhaps enemies that you're fighting, and the enemies, your party's been kind of broken up a little bit. And you as a player see one of your party members has now been struck down, and he's about to be dealt a mortal blow and killed. And another player across the field is being captured. His hands have been bound. He's about to be taken away by the enemy. Now, you only have one decision. Remember, combat is 6-second intervals. You can dash and perhaps try to rescue the player from being kidnapped, at the risk of your other player being dealt a mortal blow and dying. Or you can go to that player to perhaps save his life and defend him, but by doing so, the other player is going to be kidnapped, and perhaps you don't know where he's being taken to or being hostage or what's going to happen. Your players are now given that unfair decision. Save someone's life by allowing another player to perhaps be kidnapped, or save the player from being kidnapped at the risk of the other player dying. And these are split-second decisions. In all these Kobayashi Maru elements and scenarios, I really suggest introducing timing elements. And timing elements take two factors. One is timing for a player to make a decision. Another one can be a timer before an occurrence begins to happen. You can introduce this with a series of DC checks or DC rolls before something occurs, or giving the player a countdown, letting them know that time is moving forward, and by not doing a certain thing, that an outcome's going to happen. Now, what are some things not to do? One of the things that we have to be careful of being dungeon masters is not railroading or forcing outcomes. I really like the whole concept of DC checks. And I introduce in my game a lot of just straight DC 20 rolls with no modifiers, and I just tell the players, roll a DC 20. And I have secret or hidden from them certain checks that they either have to make, or I might be rolling a DC 20 on my own to determine if something is going to happen. You might want your players to also roll an intelligence check, a wisdom check, a dexterity check, or insight, or some other type of check, a perception check. Introducing and always having those rolls in there are important, because sometimes adding that variable to the situation is just as important as forcing the characters to making that choice. Is it possible that player is struck down and die, or does your player get there in time to block that mortal blow? There you can roll that DC check. Maybe it's a dexterity or an acrobatic or an athletics check. Or does he run and is able to grapple and save his buddy there? Again, you can roll DC checks, including the magic door or making certain types of decisions. I don't ever like telling the players, well, it just happened and there's nothing that you can do. I always think it's important to have that DC roll in there. Now, you can elevate the DC check to whatever you want to. You want to make it extremely difficult, make it a DC 18, or make it even a DC 20 with no modifiers, giving them a 5% chance of, saving something to happen. If we jump back to the Kobayashi Maru scenario in Star Trek, Captain Kirk actually cheats. which is something that nobody thought would happen. He cheats and he beats the system. Perhaps having a DC 20 check, a 5% chance, is that cheat, that roll where that character is able to save both persons' life. He's able to break the antidote and dilute it just enough to save both people's life, and he rolls a DC 20 and does so. But if he fails, they both die. I mean, there's a lot of different things that you can introduce, but it's important to always incorporate that DC check. Don't ever force something without giving the players an opportunity to roll for something, even if the probability is very low. Again, this is Parm King signing off, and give me your ideas in the comments below of some of the Kobayashi Maru scenarios you've introduced into your campaign. Until next time, may all your rolls be critical 20s.